Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by the Academy Technical Director of Al Jazira, James GOW. James, welcome to the show.
Connor, how are you? Thanks a lot for having me on, mate.
James, obviously you're only down the road from me now in Abu Dhabi, not too far away from Dubai indeed. But judging by your accent, you grew up far away. what,
Yeah,
what was your earliest football memory to date?
good question. My earliest football memory. It was going to watch Liverpool play against Middlesbrough, and I remember my dad taking me and my brother, and Liverpool won, I think 5-0 or 5-1. Robbie Fowler scored, I think 3 or 4 goals. I always remember, for some reason, I remember my dad getting me a bar of chocolate with a Liverpool wrapper on. It's always stayed in my mind. I always remember then carrying that bar of chocolates out into the stadium and then eating it whilst watching all of the fans pile into the ground. And sure enough, Liverpool won.
Wow. Out of all the memories we've had on, I think that must be right up there. But obviously, you mentioned there briefly, like growing up in Liverpool, obviously a football mad city, football, deeply embedded within the psyche. What put you down the coaching route?
Probably to be honest with you, a couple of things. One, because I wasn't going to make it as a player. I loved football, was addicted to playing football. That, as everybody's dream is when you're a young lad, is to be a professional football player. And I probably just wasn't just good enough, and I wasn't too far off, and I was a bit of a late developer. But I think by that time it was too late, and then I had a bad injury, an ankle injury, and then my brother was coaching. He was a coach doing like multi-sports and things like this in schools, and I thought, wow, I can be a football coach and get paid to still be involved in the game. And that was a bit of a kind of catalyst for me. And I started coaching Liverpool's disability team as a volunteer, myself and my brother. And I just fell in love with it. I loved it. Loved being out on the pitch, interacting with people, kicking a ball around. So I would say there was a couple of things. One, that I loved football. And then 2, I realised that you could actually turn your passion into a job, which I think is a difficult thing to do, to be able to monetize your passion. Being able to make a career out of your passion is not an easy thing to do, but I think we're very fortunate that we do make a living out of the thing that we love.
Exactly, yeah. And it's something, James, we go back and forth with the whole time. We speak with people, we know people in our own family, our inner circle, best friends that are in all these different industries. And there's a lot to be said for having fixed ended goals. But then there's an awful lot to be said for, as you just said, having a curiosity, following your passion, see where that lends itself towards. And obviously, you know where I'm going with this one. It's absolutely amazing. Your first job in professional football is with Liverpool. Then you go back, you do a master's in John Moores, and you gain an internship with Sir Kenny Dalglish's Liverpool side in 2011, 2012. Just even walking into that environment as a 22-year-old with the likes of Steven Gerrard, Luis Suarez, Jamie Carragher. I mean, how did that experience rub off on
you? I think you're being a bit generous because I haven't got a master's. I'd love to have a master's, but I was a second year undergrad when I got into when I started with Liverpool as an intern. But I'll take the master's now. How was that? It was insane. Yeah, it was an amazing experience because as a Liverpool fan, it's drilled into you that Kenny Dalglish is the king, and you grow up watching Liverpool and you go to the match and you get this incredible buzz from watching the team that you love, and you're almost indoctrinated. It's like a religion. I think if you grow up in Liverpool, that football, Liverpool and Everton are everything to you. And it's probably only when you go to other parts of the world that you realise people don't share that same intensity and same love for the game and passion for the game as you do if you come from the city. And when I got the opportunity to go to the club and work at Melwood, that was, it was like a dream come true. I almost had to pinch myself sometimes. I couldn't believe I was walking through the door or, driving in. And I always remember driving in my little Fiat Punto. I think my mum's Fiat Punto, it might be my own, but I had a Fiat Punto, and in front of me would be like Martin Skirtle, who had a Bentley Sport, and behind me would be Suarez and a Ferrari or something, you know, and I was driving in this little Fiat Punto, and then walking, you'd almost feel a little bit of an imposter, if I'm being honest, because you're thinking, I must have, you know, I must have hit the jackpot. I'd say a funny thing. I remember one game we got asked to put up the set pieces in the stadium, in the dressing rooms before the game. Myself and a good mate, Bradley Wall, he's now with Wolves now, Brad, and he and I were both in the changing room putting up all these set pieces just on the wall. And you had Gerrard walking in, Pepe Reina, Carragher, Suarez. They were all in the changing room. Me and Brad were in there, two good mates, only 22 years old or something, looking at each other, thinking, "How have we done this?" And like, you know, I remember going into like the bathroom and thinking, "Oh my God, look at all this stuff!" You know, we got tons of Lucozade, Jaffa cakes, Haribo. I was helping myself to all of them, and you know, we just walking through the door at Melbourne. And I remember probably one of the first days I was there, Steven Gerrard holding the door open for me, and you know, he was an idol for me. He was someone that I'd always, you know, idolised growing up, and I couldn't believe he was the captain of Liverpool, captain of England, and he opens the door for people. It was almost like a dream.
But like being in such a high performance environment where you have individuals as named, you know, holding themselves to such a high standard. I mean, is that infectious? Did that rub off on you? Like, for example, if you're putting in the 50, 60 hours there, it's not enough.
Mm. You quite quickly learn what elite looks like, I would say. You quite quickly learn that there's elite standards and there's normal standards. And Liverpool Football Club is elite in pretty much everything it does. And you learn that you plan more, you learn that you communicate more, you learn, you know, different parts of the game that you never thought about, and the game's broken down to so many different dimensions. You learn about leadership and what elite leaders look like, because one thing I've learned in all my different roles and watching leaders do it is leadership isn't easy. You know, managing people is not easy, and it's you know, it's probably a really undervalued skill. But you know, when you're there at a club like Liverpool, you're getting to watch people like Kenny Dalglish lead the group, Brendan Rodgers when he came in, you know, an academy level, Rodolfo Burrell and Alex Inglethorpe. You're getting to see how they make people perform, you know, how they create an environment for people to perform. And I would certainly say that standards is something that's a word banded around a lot, but it actually means something. I remember doing like a little training session when I was with the academy, and I think Mike Marsh was the coach, a really top guy. I was an intern, still at the club, working as an analyst across the first team in the academy. Mike Marsh was taking the training session, and all my job was just to feed the ball back into the session. And I remember there was the session going on with players who were Suso and other players who were part of this group, and all I had to do was feed the ball back into the session, and that was it. And I remember switching off for a moment because I was just mesmerised by the quality of football that was on display. And Marshy stopped the session and just went and said, "Look, you do that again, you'll be back in the sheds." Or something. I hadn't even been in the sheds, you know, I'd never worked in the sheds, but it goes to show that one detail matters. You know, if I don't feed that ball back in quick enough, the intensity's not high enough. If the intensity is not high enough, the players don't get better. So they're standards that have an impact in everything that you do. And I think that was a good environment for us, or incredible environment for myself and the other lads who were there, to really understand what elite meant and what working hard meant. And I've always worked hard. I think that's ingrained in me, and I think that's ingrained in a lot of Scousers, is that we want to work hard, and we understand that you've got to put hours into something. If you put hours into something that you love as well, then that's a passion. You know, I think if you're putting hours into something you hate, then that's hard work, that's stress, that's not something you want to do. But putting hours into something that you love, even though at times it can be difficult, you know, I think that's something that you find very, very meaningful.
And I suppose there's no greater gift than when you're enabled to share that passion with other people. And I suppose you were privileged to represent Liverpool both in China and in Australia. But I suppose with Liverpool on the cusp of winning a maiden Premier League title in 2014, James, what were the set of circumstances that led you to accepting that job offer to go to China?
I was working full time at the club, and the club was starting to roll out. And they were only in the kind of embryonic stage, their international academies, and they wanted somebody to go over to China. You know, I think most coaches are professional clubs generally a fair bit older. They have, you know, a playing career behind them and then become coaches. And they needed someone to go to China. And I'd completed my A for B license quite young. So I'd had a fair bit of experience as a coach. I'd developed Liverpool's leadership and management courses. So I was really interested in leadership and managing projects. And I'd already been away with the club a lot on different trips. And I think they saw that. They said to me, would you be interested in doing this? And I think because I didn't have a family, because I was single, because I was hungry, because I liked to travel, it all made sense. But Liverpool were about to win the Premier League, so I did ask them, and I did stipulate that I won't move out until the end of the season. And unfortunately, it didn't pan out how we wanted it to. But that's how it came around. Yeah, it was kind of they were starting these programs. They wanted someone to go over, somebody who knew the club, and I was fortunate enough to be selected for it.
And you could have selected kinder environments than China to build a program from scratch.
Yeah, China was probably one of the most difficult periods I've ever faced in my life is moving to China. It was probably one of the most valuable learning experiences I've ever had, but it was so far removed from what I knew. It was totally different from anything I'd ever been exposed to before. The culture was so different to the culture back home, and I think the first few weeks, within the first 6 weeks, I could have seriously probably moved home if somebody really pushed me. I might have done. And I remember being in bed a few nights thinking, and only because really I'd met a guy called Michael Schofield, top guy. I'd met him a year earlier, and I still use Michael now as a sounding board and as a mentor and a coach. But Michael and I had been delivering these courses together. He's a business coach, and I remember him showing me this diagram about comfort zones, and he was talking about how you feel when you're in your comfort zone, how you feel in your stretch zone, how you feel in your panic zone. And his whole point was that in your comfort zone, you're not moving anywhere. You don't want to be in your panic zone because it's not good for anybody. Your IQ drops and it's too overwhelming, but you want to be on the very edge of your stretch zone, and feelings of discomfort, feeling nervous, feeling alone, feeling kind of oblivious to everything. And I remember being in them moments thinking about that diagram that he drew out, showing me, thinking, well, I'm probably in a good place if I feel this uncomfortable, and I can deal with it. So looking back, it taught me a lot in a very short space of time. But I do think actually a lot of people have said to me it was a big step to take at 23. And it probably was, but it was a brilliant place. It was interesting. There was things that you wouldn't typically see, foods that you wouldn't typically want to eat. I remember coming into the academy one day, and the chef says, "Jamasa," he calls me Jamasa instead of James. "Jamasa, can," and he shows me this plate that he's made for me. And I didn't want to offend him, but he basically said, have a try this. And I looked at him, I thought, absolutely no chance I'll be trying that. He'd done me a plate of wasps, and there's no, I was a vegetarian at the time. There was no chance I was going to start eating wasps as my first entrance into meat. So, but again, as I said, it was, it was a fun experience. It was a brilliant experience. It taught me a lot of different things.
Not too dissimilar to chipper and bootle during the summer.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, loads of salt and vinegar on it.
But even then, it's fantastic. They say there's that old adage, James, in there, in education, first you get the test, then you learn. First you learn the lesson, then you take the test. In life, you take the test, then you learn the lesson from it. And I suppose there's no real substitute then actually going through these experiences. But even, you know, greatness in one area leads to greatness in another. And I suppose your ability to kind of articulate and speak so eloquently about your experiences then only a few years ago in China, you know, must rub off on your ability and your effectiveness as a coach to kind of highlight that challenge skill sweet spot to players and coaches.
I think it's hard, isn't it, sometimes to connect the dots, you know, when you look back at all and I know you're similar in that you look back at all the different hours you've done and all the different reading and all the different visits you've done to speak to people and all the different courses you've been on and watching the game. And, you know, you see, it's sometimes difficult to say, well, how does this all connect? Because you can't see it in advance. But I think when you look back, then you can connect the dots. You go, well, actually, I did this in China 7 years ago and it helped. You know, I did this in China 7 years ago and it'll help me today. And you start to connect all of these different dots. And I think it's hard to do that when you're in the moment. But when you look back, you go, well, wow, this all did make sense and it all did help you to become what you are and at this moment in time. I think you're still evolving, of course. I think you're always still evolving. But you know, even now, you know, you might have a few difficult days, and I don't think every day is going to be easy. It shouldn't be easy for what we do, and lots of the time, of course, that doesn't mean you're not enjoying it, and it doesn't mean that you don't find passionate. But sometimes there can be difficult days, and then you have to go back to them moments and go, well, actually, you know, I can zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture and say, well, I know these dots will connect somewhere at some point down the line.
Yeah, and I think that's a key lesson what you're just after mentioned there. You don't necessarily have to know that you're enjoying the experience to know that you're improving at it. And it's that balance when you're working in youth development, like both of us, James. I mean, winning and development. Obviously, winning is very important, but it's very much a short-term thing. Development is something which elongates over time. And of course, you're after going to club there, Al Jazira, renowned throughout the Emirates for its vision and for its policy and youth development. In the last year, the title-winning team had 17 members from the youth academy within the setup. I mean, for yourself, going in to that club with already sustained success over the years, being world renowned for its youth development policy. I mean, what are the challenges or what are the stepping stones for yourself, Nate, to build upon that?
I would say you have to understand the local culture, and I think you have to understand the size of the academy within the structure of the club. You know, when I first came to Jazira, I probably didn't know just how big the club was. I knew it was a big club, but I didn't know it was as big as it is. Huge stadium, big fan base, and an intensity, I would say, around the academy. You know, people will talk about the first team, but they'll talk a lot about the academy. You know, lots of people I speak to are Jazira fans. The first thing they want to talk about is the academy because it's almost part of the DNA that, you know, as you mentioned there, huge percentage of players in the first team now came through our academy, which is wonderful. But it's certainly not something I take lightly, and certainly a tradition that I want to continue. And I think there's things that we're putting in place that will ensure that continues. And, you know, we've got big aspirations. We want to develop really top class football players, not just to play for the first team, but also to play for the national team. And the dream would one day be able to go and play in a league in Europe. And in order to do that, we do have to make some changes. You know, I love that saying, progress isn't possible without change. And if you never change your mind, you never change anything. And I think change is generally a word that's internalized with fear by lots of people because they don't know what to expect. It's going to be different from what they know. But really, if we want to progress and improve, you've got to make changes as you go along. I think if you've ever read that book, Legacy, by the All Blacks, they say when you're on top of your game, change your game. And it's true. We've got a lot of players that have come into the first team, but we want to understand why they got into the first team and what things can we do to improve to ensure we produce better players and keep that conveyor belt of players from the academy through to the first team. And, you know, there's things that I think we're putting in place now, and better support structures around coaches, better support structures around players. We've got some fantastic coaches, really, really good group of coaches. We've got, I think, a very clear vision and strategy set out by the management at the club. And one of my key roles is to take that, look at how that applies to the environment that we're in, the players that we've got, the coaches that we've got, and then execute it. So there's, I often find there's a billion different cogs that have to be brought into play for that to be achieved. And it feels like we're on the way to that. We're doing lots of good things with the players, and I can see improvements in the players. 2 players now have already made their debut for the first team since I've been here. Now that's obviously, I might have had the tiniest little bit of influence on that, but that's the work that everybody's done beforehand. So there's lots and lots of good things in place, but it's definitely not something I take lightly,
And I suppose you speak about the support network there, and it seems to be the perfect marriage between yourself and sporting director Mads Davidson. Mads is well renowned for not necessarily being a critic, but being a sporting director that's been vocal in the football industry about speaking about the sustainability of clubs. That most clubs are often built on brittle foundations. So it kind of makes sense that Mads would take on a challenge where the academy is at the centre of the project and whatnot. And I think it's misconceptions really too, James. People don't understand until they're out here of how actually proud the local people are of their sport, of their football, of their local players. And it's just when you're able to implement, I suppose, the experience you've ascertained from working at Liverpool, working in Australia, working in China, and multiplied that by what they already have in place, it seems to be a winning formula.
Yeah, I think so. Look, in many ways, certainly. What I would say about Mass is a very, I would say, strong leader. He's a wonderful leader. He sets out a vision alongside other members at the club, and a really strong strategy that has legs. But of course, in order to really stick to it, that you have to be robust. And one thing I really admire about Mass is he is robust, and I think he's somebody, and I've talked to him a lot about that, who does question the pitfalls in strategies within football clubs and professional football clubs, because a lot of it is about quick wins, and whilst quick wins are important, that doesn't necessarily lead to sustainability. And what Mass is striving for is something that's sustainable, and I think he's got a wonderful strategy, and I totally buy into that, and I know pretty much everybody else in the club does as well. And that's something in itself, to get so many people to buy into one thing and convince them that this is the right path to follow and the right direction to head in. But I've got a fantastic relationship with Mass. We speak daily. He's somebody I turn to for advice. He's somebody I turn to for opinion. And as I said, he provides great kind of direction for the club, and it makes my job easy to say, well, if this way we're heading towards, these are the things I've got to put in place to ensure we get there from the academy level. So it's a constant conversation between Mass and I. I think that's important, is that you want to have a solid plan, you want to have a solid vision, but you've got to assess and analyze and adapt and be agile as you move along that as well.
And perhaps you speak about earlier positive change necessarily not being a bad thing. You've been at the club for 4 or 5 months now, James. Would you be able to take us inside some of the small victories yourself and Mads have had whilst you've been there?
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's tons and tons of things I think we could go into. I think for me, with the coaches, I feel like we're in a place where we have a very clear understanding now amongst the cohort about what the vision is, what our style of play is, what our technical program looks like, what an Jazira player looks like, and how that translates into practice. I think that that's something we put a lot of time and energy into. Spend minimum a couple of hours a week working just with the coaches on this. And one of the things I would say is that I think people can often forget who their most important, I would say, soldiers are. And in the academy, it's your coaches. For me, you have to put so much time and energy into your coaches, and of course, so everybody's important, but your coaches are the ones who do the work on the front line. They're the ones who interact daily with players. So I don't necessarily see my job as managing all of those players. We've got hundreds of players. I want them to have a wonderful experience, but in order for them to have a wonderful experience, I have to influence the coaches, and we have 20-something coaches, and I'll work with them frequently so that they understand the style, they understand the curriculum, they understand how we plan, how we make our coaching process. And I think that's something that, I think we've influenced well, is that there's a clear understanding of what's to be done. There's a clear structure. The boundaries are here, where you work within between those boundaries, the framework of how you plan, how you reflect, how you then plan again for the following week, how we focus on players and what each player needs and how that relates into practice. If you're doing this job properly and to the level that it should be done for a club the size of Jazira, it takes a lot of time and takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of hours. And I think that's one thing that's been really good, is the coaches understanding really what's expected of them, how to plan and deliver on the field. We've brought in some really good people to add to and support what we already have. A guy called Jack Cassidy, who's sensational. We talk about, I like the idea of, I think it's in a book by, is it Damien Hughes? He talks about cultural architects and having people that don't just build your training program, don't just build your fitness program, but they build actually the culture in which you work. And there's a great saying about culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I really believe that if you don't get the culture right, then nothing else works. But culture is a very difficult thing to put your finger on. It's a very difficult thing to understand, because the essence of culture is somebody saying, well, things have always been done like this, and does it mean it's right? Not necessarily, but if it's always been done like this for 20, 30 years, are you going to pick that moment to challenge it, or are you going to take your time to challenge it and then change it? Or are you even going to be able to change it? Because sometimes I don't think you can. But I think what you want to do is grasp an understanding of the behaviours that you want to see, and then that shapes your culture. So I could give you an example of that. When I first joined the club, it felt like there wasn't enough care taken about the facility at times. And I put a big emphasis on, you walk past a water bottle, pick it up, whether you're a player, you're a coach, you're a technical director, whatever your position, pick up the water bottle and put it in the bin. So we ordered loads of bins, made this pretty much a bit of a mandate amongst the coaches. We actually took a walk around the facility, all of us, and said, is this facility up to scratch? Is this suitable for elite players? Because I think all those little signals give you an insight into what the environment is like. So if someone might say, well, why is a bottle on the floor important? Well, for me, it's a reflection on that environment. It's saying, well, we're happy to just throw stuff on the floor. Somebody else will pick it up for us. Well, I don't want to work like that. I don't think that's the standards that are expected for the club. So on that level, I think that's something that's been challenged and changed, and for the good. And people are taking a lot of pride in the environment now, taking a lot of pride in the facility. And I've had people come to the facility and say, well, it's the cleanest I've ever seen it. And you might go, well, James, that's not your job, something to do with football. But for me, it feels like it is part of the job, because you want to create an environment that is optimal for players developing and coaches enjoying their job. And I think that's one way to do it.
It's small wins like that are reflected on a day-to-day basis. And as you know, like, the more momentum you gain from that, the more dopamine you're giving into the players, into the coaches, getting people to buy in. But I think, James, as you can attest to, with someone with the utmost coaching experience like yourself, there's a huge degree of ego involved in academies and coaching and some of the players. And I think how that's reflected in a lot of people see even stints now as being an academy director, a technical director, is very transient in nature. They'll come here for 2-3 years and they'll go for the short-term win. they'll never be prepared to lay down the seeds for trees they never want to see to grow. It's a very selfless thing. And I suppose with that being said, I mean, how do you necessarily get the buy-in from the people above in the hierarchy into that vision?
I would say, you mentioned about it being a transient nature. I think football in general is, especially you talk about management positions, and I'd include being a technical director and academy director in that, as well as a first team manager. Because lots of clubs simply will just focus on the result because it's tangible, it's there, it's in front of you. This is the result. We've won 4-0, then we must be a good team. Okay, well, there's no context behind that. Have you challenged any players within that? Have you simply just paid your best players against another team that's not particularly good? So, but no, that's easy. I can quantify that. So for me to in order to kind of seek buy-in from above, I think it's a constant conversation about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Showing them physically, making videos saying, look, this is what we've been doing with this player lately. There's a player that is now training with the first team, and the first team are really happy with him at the moment. I'd say 3 or 4 months ago, passing really struggled. He wasn't a bad player, but his passing wasn't as good as it should be. So we put a training program together, an increased focus on the types of passes, under pressure, where he receives the ball, all these different things, put lots of time and effort and energy into the player. And then, sure enough, we're seeing improvements in his game. First team really happy with him. He's training more with them. Feedback's really good. He's got an opportunity, hopefully, with this year to maybe make his debut. But that's something that I don't want those above not to see. I want to make sure they see that the good work that my coaches and staff are doing. I want that message being sung to them, saying, look, these are the types of things that are going on at the academy. So it doesn't just become results oriented. It doesn't just become, oh, well, we beat Shabab Al Ahly last week, so we must be a good team. It's nice. By the way, I love to win football matches. I don't know any coach that doesn't love winning football matches. I love winning football matches because you see your players' enjoyment from winning games. We all, it's a competitive game, but you want to find that fine balance between getting results and really developing football players. And it's not always an easy line to follow. But you have to go back to a very simple question, I think, and say, is what is best for the player? So each week when you're discussing where these players are going to go the following week, so me, myself, and Captain Khaled and Captain Mubarak, say the under-21s and the under-19s head coaches, and Jack, under-17s head coach, we'll sit together and say, what's on this week for the players? What have we got coming up over the next few weeks? Okay, well, this player needs a little bit more challenge. That player needs a bit more challenge. The under-19s got a huge game this week. This player usually plays under-21. Should he play under-19s and get a feel for big games? Should he play under-19s and be the best player in the game for that game, so that it builds other skills of not just purely being challenged by difficulty of game? He has to lead within the game. He has to take ownership within the game. He has to, there's a pressure on to score, so it's different pressures. But it'll always come back to the question, what's the right thing for this player? So this week, what's the right thing for the individual? And I think that's a really good way to direct what your actions and what you do. And I think when you're asked that question, it's very difficult once you've asked that question to answer anything else apart from what the right thing is for the player. It can't be then what the right thing is for me as the coach, or what the right thing is for me for the team. If this player wins, if this player plays, we might win the game. But if that player plays in under-17s when he could play under-21s, for example, then if we're looking long-term, that's going to be more beneficial for him to play under-21s. He's going to be challenged more. He's going to play a higher intensity of football. But it's a constant kind of conversation between that. And we want players, I make no bones about it. I want my players to want to win ferociously. But that means that we as coaches have to step back, allow them that desire to win. But we have to step back and facilitate that, manage it, harness it, all of those things to ensure that the players don't lose that desire to win. The best players are the ones that want to win all the time, whether that's rock, paper, scissors, where you're tossing a coin, whether it's a 1v1 training session, whether it's penalty shootout, whether it's a match, they want to win. And I think that desire to win, you never want to lose that. You want to harness that, but that doesn't mean that you should be sacrificing the development of your player. And it's a fine balance.
And it all sounds like a very taxing and draining task. You're not only doing that for one player, you're doing it for tens, if not hundreds of players and tens of coaches alike, James. I mean, we've spoke on this podcast, I suppose, for the last 40 minutes about mastering others. But in terms of self-mastery, I mean, is there any habits or routines perhaps you have in place on a daily basis to go about executing your job?
I plan a lot. I find I get into a bit of chaos when I don't plan, so I'm really diligent with planning. I'm quite of the nature where I like to talk a lot and be out and, moving things. I'm really impatient. I like to move things forward, and probably that's a good thing in many ways and a bad thing in other ways. And something I have to learn to be a little bit cooler with. Not everything can be done today, and it takes time. And what planning does for me is it allows me to do that. I talk a lot with staff. I think it's vitally important you communicate with I think communication is the biggest thing. You talk a lot with your staff and you run ideas past them and you seek their buy-in on it. You take you listen to them. That's a huge thing, is you listen to their points, and these are things that can help move us forward. Fine, it's not simply my idea. It has to be everybody's, and you have to believe that, because we've got really good people in the team. I brought in a guy recently, Mark Mark was with Valencia and Atletico Madrid, come in as a coach / analyst. We've got Khaled and Mubarak, who've been at the club for a long time and know the club and play for the national team. And, we've got a good group of people that when we discuss things, will often provide input. And you go, wow, this is a really good thing. Brought in a guy, Dr. Jonathan, who consults with us, and Jonathan's role, he was previously head of sports science for Fulham, head of innovation, really interesting guy, totally different point of view from me, which, he'll challenge lots of the things I do, and lots of things he'll challenge and I'll go, okay, maybe I need to change that. And lots of things he'll challenge and I'll go, well, actually, no, I don't agree. And probably now I'm more robust and more sure in the answer because he's challenging in the first place. So I try and surround myself with people I know it sounds a bit funny, but my uncle gave me this picture once. He said, surround yourself with the people on the same mission as you. I think that's so true, is you want to surround yourself with people that are on the same mission, because, when something difficult comes, it's where you share that load and you can get people's input and you can carry that load together. Other daily habits, I think a lot of coffee. I love coffee.
Have you tried Arabica yet?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Coffee there. After you live in Australia, you become a massive coffee snob. You go a serious coffee snob. I remember my boss taking me around, Scott his name was, and brilliant fella, and he took me around all these different coffee shops. And when I first moved to Australia, he said, that does good coffee, bad coffee, good coffee. I said, Scott, isn't it all just coffee, mate? It's just a cup of coffee. And, you put the Nescafe in, you think. He was like, he was offended by it. He couldn't believe it, like that I was talking about coffee in that way. But after a few years there, you become an absolute coffee snob. But what other things do I do? I suppose I have a nice drive into work. I have a 40-minute drive into work. I probably have a couple of things to do on them drives into work. I use it, reflect and think about the day ahead, which I find useful that time. I'll call people, chat to them. I'll speak to my brother or my mate on the way, and chat things over. And I probably constantly trying to visualize and talk through different things all the time. I've got a lot of whiteboards around. When you come to my office, everything's a whiteboard. Basically, the whole one room's a whiteboard because you can jot stuff down, talk through things. And I like audio books. I think you've got to try and zone out sometimes. I think your audio books, your podcast, they help you do those things. But I probably haven't put any habits in place that I would say, been really strategic about habits and say, you've got to do this at this time. You go to bed and turn your phone off, and then, you do a meditation, and then you put lavender spray on your pillow and you have a great night's sleep, all them things. I probably don't do anything like that. But I've found a routine that works for me, I suppose.
I think it's one of those, you genuinely love football, and that kind of rubs off speaking to you now. We spoke a few times on the phone and whatnot, and it's certainly an infinite game, the role you have as an academy director, and you do need infinite energy to play in an infinite game. Lo and behold, I mean, the first answer you gave me in this podcast, you were speaking about a bloody wrapper. You're a chocolate wrapper, you remember from a game in which Robbie Fowler scored a hat-trick all those years ago. But with that being said, like getting out of bed in the morning, James, I mean, are you a goal-orientated person? Is that what drives you? Or is it just the love and the passion for the game of football itself?
Probably a bit of both, if I'm being honest. I'd say football's a passion without doubt. I love football, but I like leading things and I like leading people. You know, I find probably nearly as much meaning in that as I do in football. You know, I'd love the idea one day to maybe lead an organisation that's nothing to do with football, to see whether, and I think lots of the principles of leadership within football do translate into business and other things. So I love that, and I love that kind of the weight of the responsibility that, you know, you've got to do a good job for people and you've got to make it a good environment for people to be in. You know, I feel that there's a big sense of responsibility for that. Goals, you've got to have. You have to have goals, you know, and whether they're personal or professional. You know, personally, you know, I don't want to be bogged down by goals. I don't want them to become a wrench around my neck, but I want them to be something that I strive towards and I aim towards. But I think when you're leading a group of people, you have to have goals. You have to have things that are clear and tangible to aim towards, because people have got to know where to direct their attention. And when you've got a goal, you know, and when you work at a football club, you start with a really big goal and you make it into loads of little mini goals and sub goals and the micro goals, and then it gets fed down to all different people. They've all got to feed into that one overarching goal, that one big goal of, we want to produce a player who's ready to go and play in the first team. And to do that, there's 1,000,001 different things you've got to have a handle of. But if you don't have any clear goals, where does somebody orient their attention? Where does somebody orient all of their plan? Why are we doing what we do if we don't have a goal? Otherwise, we're just doing it for the sake of it. And I think if you've got a goal, every action you take should be affiliated to that goal. So this is the goal. Well, every action I take should be a positive. There should be a positive feedback loop to say I'm achieving something that's getting me closer and closer to that goal. So, you know, the goal is to prepare to play for the first team. He's under 21s at the moment. Well, what's the gap between him and the first team? Well, the gap right now is he doesn't use his 1v1 enough. He doesn't run in behind enough. Okay, well, every action I now take over the next 6 weeks has to be in line with that goal, has to be attuned with that goal. So it might be that for 1 week we're focused 1v1 specific tasks in a game. It might be that we do extra training sessions with that player. It might be that we do video work with that player. Okay, well, there's 3 things that every time I do one of those things, that should be a feedback loop to me, something positive to say, right, tick, that's moving me closer and closer towards achieving that goal. So I think when you're leading people, you have to. I think personally, you want to have some goals, certainly, but you want them more for aspirational purposes, I would say, rather than anything else. That's how I find it useful anyways, you know. Like, I make no bone, I'd love to be a manager one day at first team level. I love being a technical director. I love leading people, but I'd love also to stand on the sideline and manage football players in a first team match and kind of feel that intensity of being a manager. But if I was never to get there, I would never look back and go, oh, that was rubbish, that, because you enjoy the journey, you know, you want to enjoy things that you do every single day of the week. You know, I love going into the academy and talking to the chef. You know, he's a nutter but he brings brilliant energy to the place, you know, and I like people who take pride in what they do. You know, whatever your job is, whether you're a security guard at the academy, take pride in what you do. moves things forward. And I think there's a simple matrix where you think performance and performance and energy. If somebody's got really good energy and performs in what they do, they're an A-star person. I look at our chef at the academy. He's incredible energy. He's always happy. He's always smiling. But he takes serious pride in everything he does. He wants to provide the best culinary experience for his players, and those people really help you move forward. I went off on a mad tangent there. I don't even know how I got onto the chef.
Oh, it's all good stuff. And to be honest, James, I mean, brings it all back to the end of the day. I mean, your big job is player development, of course. I mean, you're focused on developing players for the first team environment, not necessarily right now, but over the future years. And I think it's an incredible journey you've been on, starting in Liverpool, working your way up through the community program, spells in China, Australia, Singapore, now the United Arab Emirates. But I suppose if I was to ask you one tough question, I mean, what do you believe now about player development all these years later, after all these international experiences that you necessarily didn't believe when you left Liverpool 2014?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. I'd have to think about that. What do I believe now? I think small details matter. Really matter. Where you place a cone can have a huge influence on the type of session, which means the type of session might not be suitable for that player to improve. I think one thing I'd say is that I realise now the importance of small details, and I suppose aligned with that would be about having the right people around you, people who are really knowledgeable around you, because probably naively when I was a young lad, I probably thought, oh, I could do that, no problem. Oh, that's easy. I can do that. But people who are elite coaches for me, Michael Beale's somebody I try and speak to a lot. He's an elite coach and he can take really complex ideas and make them very simple to understand. That's an incredible skill. So when I was probably a young lad, I was thinking, I could easily go and put that session on, no problem. But why am I putting that session on, and what influence and benefits that going to have for the player? And now I know, it takes a team to really produce one top quality player. You've got to have an expert in each of those fields, because people move you forward, and you can't do it alone. And if you think you can do it alone, then you're kidding yourself. You've got to have the right people around you to achieve the things that you want to achieve.
It's funny you mentioned the details, because aside obviously from your day-to-day work with Jazira James, you've developed a nice little niche online platform called Underground Coaching. Can you tell our audience listening a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I suppose I'd always had this idea where I thought there was a gap for tactical education for players and coaches. I think there was a space where I always found when I was coaching or leading coach education sessions, or even involved in a coach education session, the moment somebody got out a tactics board, or the moment somebody got out video on a game and started talking through it, everyone zoned in, and they really wanted to listen. And because coaches love tactics, but I think it's the most difficult thing to talk about. Technical skills are a lot more closed, and it's a lot easier to understand. I think I could almost get my mum to teach them technical skills. I probably wouldn't want her to teach them, but how you pass a football, lock your ankle, hit it with the inside of your foot with this amount of pace, they're fairly closed, whereas tactical things are evolving all the time. So I wanted to put something together for coaches to be able to access that and access tactical content. So there's myself and a few others who are involved in that. And we have a subscription-based program where players and coaches log on, and for players we talk about mentality, and we bring in guest speakers where we brought in a UFC fighter. We brought in Katarina Johnson-Thompson, who was heptathlon world champion. She spoke to all the players, and UFC fighter Danny Roberts spoke to players and kids about, how do I compose myself when I'm about to go into battle? How do I control my emotions? How do I prepare myself? how do I act like a professional, even when I'm not a professional? You know, that was a real good learning thing from Danny, is that he said one of the biggest things I'd like a young person to take away is that when I was aiming to become a UFC fighter, I wasn't a professional, but I acted like a professional. I think it's a really valuable lesson. I use that a lot with our players. Is you might only be 15, 16 years old. Start to act like a professional now. It'll help you get to, you know, it'll move you closer to achieving what you want to achieve. So going back to that, we opened up our underground coaching tactical blueprint, which is an online course giving coaches a framework around tactics in a specific formation, gives them a framework to talk about the game, specific details, so they can take them things and work with their players on them. So we've got some really cool things happening with that. Got some really good people involved with that. And, you know, we also do our mentorship things where I'm working with a guy at the moment in Ireland, really good guy. We're working on a one-to-one basis to help shape his club's philosophy, help shape his coaching ideas, and give him a tactical blueprint probably to work from. So I set that up about 18 months ago, and it's actually moved really quickly, which I wasn't expecting it to do, but it's really enjoyable and something that is still going on at the moment.
Ever evolving, and I'm sure James will continue to go from strength to strength. I've been on the Instagram page, I've been on the website a few times, and to be honest, everyone should check it out. Definitely worth the check. Some fascinating stuff there. And to be honest, what I like most about the tactical content you put up is the language. It's simply explained. You see a lot of language connotated with tactics nowadays, and that's just.
Sorry, I lost you there a second.
Sorry, James. I was just saying what I like the most about the work you're doing with underground coaching is your concise way of explaining tactics, the language used.
Yeah, I think everything comes back to how you communicate, I suppose. So what we've aimed to do is take difficult ideas and make them as simple as possible to understand. You know, I think it was Einstein who had something about, you know, if you can't explain it in simple terms and you don't understand it properly, it's you know, I like that, because you want that message to be understood by everybody who's listening to it. And if it's not understood by anybody who's listening to it, then it's not explained properly. You know, I'd love my mum to be able to watch it and partly understand it. So I've given my mum a bit of a rap here, haven't I? But, you know, I think it's, yeah, it's important, isn't it, the language you use, because it might sound great in your head, but if you can't articulate that, it's meaningless. You know, you might have the best tactics in your head and all these things, can't articulate it, it's meaningless. You know, so the coaches I've always really enjoyed listening to are the ones who can take them ideas and make them simple to understand. And I think when you can do that, then you can move mountains with your players.
And as we close, James, I mean, for me, it's been an entirely fascinating discussion. There's loads of side notes I've wrote down, perhaps for another podcast another day. But just to close on one question, I mean, you've been on an absolutely thrilling and exciting journey so far, and it's an inspiration to many. But what advice would you have for those coaches, perhaps back in Ireland, back in the UK, and that are willing to throw themselves at a challenge like yourself?
I think go and do it. You know, it's easier said than done, but the people you meet, the places you go to, it's so interesting. You know, I mean, lots of people want to work in football in England. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to work in football in England again one day for sure. But going to different places and traveling to, you know, faraway lands, you meet all kinds of people and you build up these kind of stories. And I think it just gives you such an amazing understanding of what you value and the things you enjoy. And, you know, you have stories that other people probably would never even dream of. And I think go and do it, because football can take you to a lot of places and you'll learn so many things from doing it. And, you know, there's many opportunities out there, so many opportunities out there. But one thing I'd say is as well is that you can't escape the process of practice. So if you want to become a really good football coach, go and take 3 months off and go and coach in the States for 3 months on camps. you might be coaching, you know, players who aren't necessarily brilliant football players, but you're practicing the process every single day of the week. You're practicing coaching football, and that's a lot of practice in a short space of time. Just take the step and go and do it. You know, there's so many amazing things out there to see, and football can take you to so many places. It's I think it all helps as well. I think it all helps. It all accumulates, and you know, those experiences that you have from life, they help in your professional career, certainly.
I think your career today is a shining example of that. But James, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of inspiration taken, and I'll be sure to link underground coaching and show notes below. Hope you enjoyed this as much as we did.
I appreciate it a lot. Thank you, Connor, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.